everyone, and welcome to this issue of our HIE Peer Perspective series. My name is Jen Schaefer. I am the social worker here at Hope for HIE. Today, I have two wonderful mothers of HIE children who are here and talking to us about navigating relationships when your child has HIE. And we are going to talk about all of the different relationships and how things change, strengthen, and sometimes disappear. And how do you get through those different times? So before we get into too much, I would love for you guys to just give yourself a little bit of an introduction of who you are, a little bit about your kiddo, and what brought you here to share your stories. Katie, you want to go first?
So, my name is Katie. I have an 8-year-old daughter named Riley that has HIE. She was diagnosed with HIE at birth after a hard delivery, and she went about 5 minutes without oxygen, which is what resulted in her HIE.
And I'm Shayna Beeksma, and my HIE kiddo is Judah. He is 2.5, and his HIE resulted from a sudden onset around 34 hours after birth of severe hypoglycemia, and coupled with his metabolic condition, MCAD deficiency, that he was born with. He was without a pulse for over 70 cumulative minutes. So that's what resulted in his severe HIE. So he was receiving CPR, thank God, during that entire time. But of course, it's only a third of the blood flow that your brain needs. So for 70 cumulative minutes, he was only receiving a third of the blood flow. And so, yeah, severe HIE was the main result. And I apologize, I ducked out of the frame at the beginning of the intros. He is beside me here, and I was just giving him a snack so that we can keep him happy while I'm on this recording. So please
that
don't
is
be
fine.
mind.
We always welcome cameos from the children. Well, let's just dive right in. Let's talk about those early days when you were possibly in the NICU, or Shayna, maybe you were in like the pediatric ICU when this occurred. What did your support systems look like? What did you feel like you needed from people? Did they show up like you expected or not?
Maybe Katie, you can go first.
Sure.
Yeah, so when we were in the NICU with Riley, it was mainly just myself and her father that were there. My parents came and visited one time, and then I don't know if they were just not sure how to handle the situation, but they really didn't come back again and see her. So it was mainly just us, but we did have a super supportive NICU team, our neonatologist, our neurologist. Everybody was super supportive, all of the nurses. So I think that we got a lot of our support in like the early days of her being in the NICU from mainly the NICU staff. We did have a couple friends that were distant but present when she was first born, but I think a lot of our support did come from the hospital.
In our case, we were fortunate to have a lot of support from our family and friends, our church community, and even other folks that we didn't even know, but apparently word got around to other local churches in our town. And so there was a lot of support, which we were not expecting, and we're so grateful for. Support from the hospital as well, to a large extent. I would say that our local hospital was very supportive. They were the ones that did the initial life-saving measures, and then he got transported to a children's hospital. At the children's hospital, the nurses were wonderful. Some of the doctors were great, but others, as I'm sure we'll probably discuss later on, were not so wonderful. And basically, if we had taken their advice, our child would not have lived. He would have died. So I found the hospital support to be different not as wonderful as I would have hoped, but it's also opened our eyes in terms of what you can expect in, literally life or death circumstances, and the pressure that can be put on you as a parent.
Thank you, guys. And in those early days, transitioning out of the hospital setting and in to home and navigating, who was showing up for you?
I mean, I can go if you'd like. Family and friends again in our church community. So basically you could say the built-in social support, community support showed up with meals. We came home to a clean house because we'd left in a frenzy. His HIE episode happened at home. So I found out after that when, close friends and family came and, cleaned up our house, they didn't want us to come back home to literally how it looked when we left with the ambulance. Just um life-saving measures like on the floor, packages opened, like all of that it'll be re-traumatizing. So they came in and we cleaned up and we had a home that didn't even show that there was a life and death emergency, and we were last there. And then there was a meal train started, so we didn't have to think of meals for a good, I think, couple of weeks, which was wonderful. So we were fortunate. I know not everybody's had that, like Katie will elaborate, but we were fortunate that socially we were held, and that was invaluable in the early days.
Yeah, so our story is a little bit different. When we came home from the hospital, I feel like a lot of our family just, like I said, didn't know how to handle the situation. So for a good bit of the first year that I had Riley at home from the NICU, I really just felt like it was me and her. Um, we didn't have a lot of people come see her. We didn't have a lot of people reach out. Really, we were just navigating life, just me and her. I did get divorced in her first year of life, so that was a big stressor too. But I mean, we did have some of her therapists that were coming that offered us a good bit of support, but really it was just us.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I know also that when people sometimes reach out, they're well meaning, but sometimes there's those comments, and we see this frequently within some of our social media, that he or she is going to be fine. She looks perfect. What do you want? Just, it'll be okay. Did you have anybody share any kind of phrases like that? And how did you react to those kind of comments, knowing that, they probably were well meaning, but when you're in the thick of it, I can only imagine that many feelings can arise. And how does that affect one's relationship with people?
So for me in particular, I have a nursing background, so I felt like a lot of the time when people were telling us like she's going to be fine, she looks fine, I knew like all of the medical things that were going on in the background, all of her test results and all of the things that the doctors were relaying to us. So it was hard because I felt like a lot of the people that were telling us like she's going to be fine had this false sense of hope about the reality, and I felt like I was more consoling them a lot of the time versus taking that as like an uplifting message, because I worried about them and how like their perspective was going to be after if we didn't have the outcome that they were expecting. So I felt like a lot of the time when people were trying to reassure us that she was going to be fine, we were just kind of trying to educate them and let them know like that might not be the case for our daughter.
And I think in our case, because we're not medically trained, I'm a lawyer and a state lawyer, not even a personal injury lawyer. I'm not familiar with medical records except to the point that they may affect somebody who's elderly. So um, what the doctors were telling us, I actually had to rely on a cousin and an aunt who were RNs to effectively kind of translate for me what are the doctors saying, because compounding the fact that I'm a layperson, comparatively, and a parent in the midst of the trauma of not knowing, is my child going to live or die? What's going to happen? It felt like a fog and trying to get information through a fog. And at the end of the day, part of you is wondering, is he going to live? Will I get to take my baby home? Right. And the false hope. I mean, I would say it was hard to maybe distinguish at the time, because unlike Katie, I don't have that medical background. Whether what people were saying that, oh, he's gonna be fine, especially once he was extubated and so he's removed from a lot of the machines in the PCCU, the pediatric critical care unit. Then of course he's looking more like a normal baby, except for an NG tube up his nose. So people are trying to say, yeah, he's gonna be fine, don't worry. And I wanted to think that. And I think, especially because he had survived to that point, I think a big part of me believed that. Um, but then there were other comments that, even to an more of an extreme, I would say. I, for one, because I didn't have the background of medical knowledge that Katie had, for instance, I didn't necessarily view the, oh, he's going to be fine, as you guys aren't playing with reality. I'm like, maybe he will be. I don't know. But then there was a comment I'll never forget from someone who is a nurse, a friend's mom, retired nurse. And it was coupled with the faith aspect, because we're Christians and we firmly believe that, if God's will is for him to be healed, then that can happen and it can defy medical odds. But what she said was more, when I mentioned to her that they had predicted severe cerebral palsy, severe epilepsy, quadriplegia, severe spasticity, like all of like the worst case scenarios if he did survive. I remember in like her religious terminology, she was like, well, I rebuke that. That is not going to happen. That is not going to be the case. My granddaughters had a similar prognosis and they are perfectly fine. They have brain bleeds, like they were NICU babies and whatnot. And I remember when she said that, like she was just very dismissive of that prognosis. And I remember thinking, I wish that that's the case. I would love it, but also knowing that I I kind of felt almost as if, I hate to burst your bubble, I doubt that it's going to be completely normal, or he's going to be completely. I doubt that the extreme outcome that you're advocating for in that sense, if I can use that word, and predicting and rebuking, like such strong religious language. I'm like, I wish that were so, but I don't think that that's going to be the case. And so, in that kind of sense, similar to what Katie's saying, you kind of felt, even though she was a nurse, so what do I know? She's a nurse. You kind of almost felt like you wanted to be like, yeah, I hope so. But knowing that I couldn't build my hope on that, because that just seems so unlikely. So it was almost counterproductive, because it creates a tension in you as a parent, this isn't really supportive. I like reality. I like the, he will likely do better than you expect. Wonderful. Something more realistic, but the extreme did not really help at the time.
Yeah. And I appreciate that candidness, that, comments can be taken both ways based on, where you are in that space, your background. So just moving through those things. And did any of those comments outwardly affect any relationships that you had, that you remember?
So, I mean, I feel like it almost got to a point where it was like an argument with my parents, because they were like, no, we're telling you she looks fine. She looks normal. Like, babies can have a hard start and be perfectly fine. And I personally was telling them, like, her brain scans don't look normal. Like, outwardly, she is presenting as a typical baby, but there's deficits that we're already seeing early on, that she isn't going to be 100% neurotypical. And they just were always very dismissive of that. Like, no, she looks fine. She's going to be fine. You can't think that way, because if you think that she is going to have a negative outcome, then she's going to, which I feel like was like a lot of pressure on myself because I was trying to be realistic about the situation, like from a medical perspective. These things are very obvious right now, but also like that was a lot of pressure to be put on me to be told, like, if you think she's going to have a bad outcome, then she is. Because we were putting so much effort into her having a good outcome with therapy and everything, but we were also trying to be like mindful of the fact that she probably was going to have some disabilities that we needed to prepare ourselves for in the future.
Exactly. I think there's a fine line, like what Katie's saying, between being supportive and being unrealistic. And it's not to say never give, never stop having hope. I mean, Katie's and my kids have already defied the odds tremendously. There's certainly a place for hope, right? The sky's the proverbial limit to a large extent in terms of how much these kids will regain in terms of what they lost with their brain injuries. But, there's a balance. And when loved ones are dismissive of where you are at as the parents, like you're the one that's closest to your hurt baby. You're navigating the day in and day out. You're there for all the doctors' meetings at the hospital. You're there for all the appointments. And it's almost, yeah, it's dismissive where, I mean, if you know in your gut as a parent, he's not gonna be fine. She's not gonna be fine. I pray and hope that he and she will be as great as they can be, but please just respect where I'm at as a parent, and meet us where we're at and support us in the way that we're asking for support. If I'm asking for support in terms of please pray, please continue to, look up resources and alternatives that maybe I haven't thought of because the medical team does not know everything. I've learned that so far. Great. These are practical ways that you can help, and if I need a shoulder to cry on because it's overwhelming, be that shoulder to cry on, but don't be dismissive when I know it's not going to be fine.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that perspective. One relationship I would like to talk about specifically is sometimes it gets overlooked a little bit because when we're talking about navigating relationships, a lot of people talk about more of the extended family or the friends or the community. But you know what? There are two people that created this child. There's usually two people involved in that trauma space. And Katie, I know you touched on this a little bit earlier about your relationship with Riley's dad. But I would really like to talk about your relationships with your partners and what did navigating those relationships look like? The good, the bad, and what were the different things that you had to go through?
So, I know that I mentioned earlier in the first year of life, I did get divorced. I mean, it was a very, very stressful situation. And myself and Riley's father, I don't feel like we're on the same page as far as her diagnoses and things that we were trying to do to help her have a better quality of life. And we did end up going our separate ways. So I was a single parent for a while in the beginning. But when she was 2, I did remarry, and that has been a godsend to us. I mean, her stepdad, Dana, is so supportive of her and so helpful. And I feel like that's kind of where I made like came around the corner as far as like relationships go because his family and his mother, his sister, like his whole family has just taken Riley in like with open arms, accepted her for exactly the way that she is. They're always super supportive, giving me like resources as far as like things that we could do with her. And then just really just being a big support to me and like reminding me like you're a good mom, what has happened with her is not your fault, but um, they have been an amazing support, and Dana has been an amazing support for Riley as far as helping just us with her needs at home, like with her epilepsy, kind of just helping be that extra support person for me to talk to about all of that stuff. And so that really is where I kind of turned the corner and feel like I finally did get some good support was when we got together.
Yes, I would
Love it, you
definitely
guys.
say, oh, there's Judah.
Oh, hi,
There's
buddy.
my HIE baby here. So he was putting up his arms and trying to crawl over to me. So I figured, let me just pick him up here.
He doesn't want to miss
Um,
out.
Pardon?
He is so precious.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, little Mr. Man here. So yes, I would say, yeah, we were warned actually by the hospital that, make sure you both as parents, get therapy. Um, Many marriages fall apart, after a trauma like this, as Katie was mentioning. And so, it's imperative, as they said, make sure you realize that there's a high risk of that. And ideally, both of you, seek the requisite therapy and other assistance needed to help you navigate this. If both of you aren't on board doing that, then, you know, we're not sure, the odds are not necessarily in your favor. Um, I did have therapy. Hubby has not, he hasn't prioritized it. Um, and I would say, yeah, I mean, marriage has not been easy. It's never easy, but especially dealing with a trauma like this, it's definitely took us through some very deep waters. But by the grace of God, just taking it one step at a time, trying to still find our way back to each other amidst all the demands associated with life with a bunch of kids and including an HIE kid who is now stimming. um, yeah, it's because I think there's a lot of trauma, right? And the trauma can build up and result in, say, overreactions to minuscule risks and things like that because of the loss of control, especially by a father, husband, feeling like his newborn son very nearly died and there was nothing he could do about that. And I think, especially for guys, that real sense of powerlessness can really be crippling, and then can manifest in so many other ways that are not positive for the family dynamic. But I definitely give him credit. He's come a long way on his own. Still so much farther to go. So do I. At a year and a half of therapy, I'm sure I could do more. But yeah, it's your immediate family that sees the greatest fallout, particularly your spouse or partner. It's because it's like you said, Jennifer, it took two to make the baby, right? Two are very invested and two very nearly lost their child. And that, I mean, the child surviving is a gift, but even the grief associated with a disabled child who this isn't how any of our other 2-year-olds were, right? We have 5 kids and working with the fact that we're so happy, it's such a joy, like what does it mean? I remember seeing, I think, an example online about walking through life with a disabled child, kind of like the difference between planning a trip to Italy and ending up in Holland. Maybe you've seen that poem. And so, yeah, so Holland is still a very wonderful destination, but it is very different from Italy. And so you get used to what Holland is like. And it's kind of a bonus when I saw that because my husband's of Dutch background, hence the name. So he would be inclined to say, hey, Holland's pretty darn good. But yes, so I would say that's the impact that it's had, on marriage, that it put us through some very hard waters. Still is, but at least one spouse, in my case, me getting a lot of useful tools from therapy. Because you can't compel the other spouse to go to therapy, especially guys, but being onto some tools that I can use on my end and see how he's receptive to them. Fortunately, he has been receptive to a large degree, but lots of room for improvement. And we know that if we're not stable, and at least Katie, by the grace of God, you remarried to somebody who is wonderful and supportive. But literally, I can't imagine going through this journey without a firm foundation that isn't just me. That would be very difficult. So yeah. You care. It's a very happy boy.
He is. He's so adorable. He's so adorable. But, what you guys both had said, trauma really does affect everyone differently. And, it's just that unknown and sitting in that space, especially in those early days of not knowing what is your life going to look like. Shayna, you said you have other children and, you have an idea of what it is supposed to look like. So, we just have to remember that relationships do need support, and we need to surround ourselves with those people that we can walk through life with. And maybe it's not the first go around, but Katie, I love that you found basically an entire family who just surrounds you and supports you and your daughter. And I think that's so important.
I did. I am so lucky to have all of them now, especially with how lonely the early days felt. It's so nice to just have them to rely on and call whenever I'm having like a hard day or something going on with Riley girl, because I'll just call them. And especially my mother-in-law, she's an amazing lady.
That's wonderful. Now, when it comes to relationships, sometimes we get in situations where we might have to step back. And I think, Katie, you were the one that spoke to this when we were talking about this the other day, is stepping back from relationships when it's, people that, you're close to. What does that do to you? And do those how do you get back to those relationships, or even do you? As you keep going through the HIE process?
I feel like things just started getting really hard for a while. And so many people had distanced us for so long that I kind of just got to a point where it felt easier to me to just kind of push everybody away and just take care of everything by myself, because it was easier than having to try to navigate and feel like we had to tiptoe around other people, or like I said, listen to the people that were telling us like she's fine, even though we knew at that point that was not 100% the reality for us. So I do feel like it took me a long time to get to a point where I felt like I could reintroduce people into my life. Unfortunately, I didn't get a lot of mental health help that maybe I should have in the early days. So I would say Riley was probably 3 to 4 years old when I finally did kind of start reaching out to people again. I can't say that a lot of my friends that I had at the time, because I was pregnant with 5 girls when I had Riley, and they all kind of had neurotypical children. And I feel like that I did also distance myself from them, because it was just really hard for me to see all of their neurotypical babies that, my child should be in that same stage of life, and we just weren't. But I do feel like I did start reaching out, especially I'm a nurse. So like a lot of the girls that I work with are nurses, so they have a little bit better of an idea of if I tell them like her MRI didn't look great, or she's having problems with her epilepsy. So I do have a very close friend now. Her name is Jackie, and she's a nurse that I work with in the ER. And her little girls and her husband have all been a big support for us, because she just really is like a truly genuine, amazing person, and she's kind of accepted Riley just for how she is. So I do feel like my community is a little smaller, but I have ventured out and met some new friends. I still don't have the closest relationship with my parents, but I kind of feel like Dana's family does fill that void a little bit for us.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of went out there and kind of found your community. You found your support. And once you found Dana, can I make the assumption things started feeling falling kind of into place with those supports because you had his support and his family's support, and didn't have to do it alone anymore.
Yeah, so that was a huge turning point. It went from just me and Riley against the world to me and Riley and this big, beautiful family that loves us so much, against the world. And it was definitely a game changer, finally feeling like I had some support. And I do really feel like that facilitated me to kind of reach out to other people on more of a friendship level. Because I felt like there are actually people out there that want to love and support us. So it was definitely a lot different than in the early days of HIE and the NICU and things.
Well, and I think we have to remember there is a distinct difference in protecting your own energy. Like, you were in the thick of it in those beginning days. It's not the same as giving up on a relationship. We have to be protective of our own emotional well-being so we can survive and we can continue to take care of the ones that need us to take care of them. So, it doesn't in any way, shape, or form sound like you ever gave up on the relationships. It was more of just those protective factors of, we're going to just make it through each day.
Yeah. And a lot of those early days did just feel like just getting through, like I just need to make it one more day, just one more day. And I felt like I just had to put my whole heart, soul, and time into Riley so that I could focus on everything that she needed. And so I kind of just put everything else in the background during those early days.
It sounds like, if I may, that you ended up with the community you needed in the end. So Riley's trauma, through the HIE experience, kind of helped to call on, the less supportive, separating the weeds from the chaff, to put it bluntly. And now you have an amazing support network and amazing community through, your new in-laws and new friends. So now you've kind of built back better. So it's a good ending that way. And as I mentioned, I fortunately did not have to create distance. If anything, it highlighted that there are actually some new friends through which I think it kind of trauma bonded. I'm not sure if I'd mentioned, but in our prior call, but one of the paramedics that was resuscitating him was a good friend of mine at the time, and now we're even closer now. Trauma bonding, absolutely, but I'll take it. And because it opened up a whole other side of some people that I already knew, and now we're even closer. So it could have gone either way, right? But in this small community, I mean, we live just outside of a town of 500 and near a city of 20,000. So, a lot of people know each other, and word got around very quickly as to what happened. And so I'm so grateful. I know that if we were still in a city we used to live in of like 500,000, 5 years ago, I know without a doubt it would have been a very different outcome. This particular community, we knew it was special before we moved, or when we first moved. And we are so fortunate they showed up and showed out. So I think at the end of the day, ending up with a community that is supportive, that loves you and your HIE child, wants to be there for you, help out emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually, is key. And so whether you get it at the outset or you make it as life goes on, I think ending up at that is going to be critical for your own emotional and mental and spiritual well-being as an HIE parent. Isolation, I feel like, would be highly, highly detrimental and destructive for an HIE parent. You need support. You need the village.
Yeah. I would like to move in. Both of you actually touched on this, navigating relationships with the medical staff. Katie, you had said like that was almost your lifeline in the beginning, is the staff within the NICU. And Shayna, you had actually mentioned more of a ebb and flow depending on how you were who you were talking to. But can you share, what did those relationships look like? Was there, I know sometimes it can be a supportive energy, sometimes it can be frustrating, but what did that look like during those early days? Was there providers or nurses that made a meaningful, difference in the outcomes? If you can speak to that and any other relationships that you've developed over the years, because I'm only going to make the assumption that your child may see a specialist or two. What do those relationships look like?
Yeah, so when we were in the hospital in the NICU and everything, I do feel like we had a lot of support. I feel like we did have, like Shanna said, that we did have some providers that were kind of pushing us more towards and I feel like they were trying to be like more realistic with us, but the worst outcomes, and maybe that we should consider quality of life and things like that while we were in the NICU. So I do feel like that was kind of a really hard situation to navigate with our medical team. But aside from those instances, I feel like our nurses were great. We did see a lot of therapists in the NICU. And then our neurologist that we have at 8 years old is the same neurologist that we have had since she was in the NICU. So I do feel like she's been, while she is very upfront and serious, has been a big support to us, just navigating um, how life has changed since the NICU. So we originally thought that Riley was kind of going to be more end of life care at the beginning. So we went with a palliative kind of approach in the beginning. And then as Riley showed us her willpower, we switched gears and went more towards therapy and things like that. But yeah, I do feel like most of our hospital experience and our team was a really good support for us.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned, I think briefly earlier, so his care was spanned across two hospitals, our local hospital in the city nearby, which was fabulous. I have nothing but wonderful things to say about them. They tried everything to give him a fighting chance, even, exceeding protocol. I understood that normally if vital signs are absent and there's no shockable heart rhythm, then typical emergency protocol is to call it at 30 minutes of that. And when we obtained the medical notes, they went on for over an hour, when vital signs are absent and there was no shockable heart rhythm. And I'm so grateful because here's this energetic boy today. So the first hospital that did the initial life-saving measures were amazing. And then he was transferred to a children's hospital. They were still pretty good, but that's where tensions started to arise. And the tensions arose in terms of prognosis, um, whether, quality of life discussions. And what hubby and I found was that I would say 50-50 in terms of the doctors being supportive of what you wish as a parent for your child and pressuring you into an outcome that fit with maybe how they would decide if this were their child, but this is not their child. So their priorities in terms of what kind of quality of life they would be willing to tolerate, and then making you as a parent seem as if you're selfish and whatnot for wanting to give your child more time on the machines. You're taking space away from other children who are more likely to recover and benefit. Just even getting the clear sense that, with that line of reason, for instance, you're taking up a bed. We need this bed in the critical care unit. Your child's not going to make it, so give up the hope let him pass away peacefully. We'll make him comfortable. They use very, persuasive language. And then you know that you'd be on. It's a conveyor belt, and they're on to the next one. And and we did not feel very supported by that roughly 50% of more so doctors. Nurses are wonderful. I feel like maybe all but one were amazing. And the one was probably just okay, just because the others set such a high standard. It was the doctors that were more 50-50. And just that pressure to disconnect from life-saving measures at a time when it was most critical, when they knew that, yeah, if we had disconnected him from the life support machines, 7 days into his HIE incident, he more than likely would have passed away. But as soon as you keep him on for an extra, 10 days to 2 weeks after, then his odds of making it would have improved. And it still is a frustrating thing that can bring up some angst when Jason and I discuss that with anybody, that if we had listened to what the doctors had said and pulled the plug, this sweet boy would not be here. And we found out afterwards from a second opinion that we didn't necessarily ask for, but a more senior doctor altered the recommendation from 3 days to give his brain time to turn around to 10 to 14 days to give his brain time to turn around. And the former opinion was by a fresh out of fellowship doctor who had just come to the hospital and somehow was in charge of the PCCU that week. And then when the next doctor started, literally the next day, because the first one shift was done, like just the timing. He was on for a week, and then the next week started. The more senior doctor is the one that said, in his experience, he had seen remarkable results at times when more time was given to the neonate on the machines. And that changed everything. Having him have more time on the machines changed everything. So again, just that drastic discrepancy even between persons on the same team. I mean, he was respectful of his younger colleague, but he put it to us. And I just wish that more doctors were willing to, at the time, as we've learned now, just be honest about the range of outcomes. That yes, it doesn't look good. Yes, the MRI is damning. We'll give it that. It looked awful. It was all white for probably 90% of his brain at every level. But that there was insufficient medical literature at the time on this severity of injury on neonatal patients to really, give a very accurate prognosis. Neonates are just so young. Their brains are so unpredictable in terms of how they can respond. And basing the prognoses and the pressure that corresponded to those prognoses on older babies and younger children, and basically literally putting pressure on parents to make a life or death decision at the neonatal stage based on literature that doesn't actually closely apply to neonates. Now, looking back, knowing what we know now is kind of cruel. Like, at least just be honest about, yeah, there could be a range. You could end up on the really bad range where your child is not much above a vegetative state. Tell us that. We need to know that. But don't then pressure us to remove the child from life support because you're not open to the fact that at this neonatal stage, there's a lot that we don't know. And it was after he stayed on life support for longer, per the second doctor's recommendations, that we then heard from another doctor who had also confirmed. She's like, yeah, we just don't know. She's like, the literature is still emerging on the neonatal stage. So she's like, yeah, he may very well beat many of the odds. So if you are fine with that, and if you are open to the fact that worst case scenario, maybe you could take him home with a trach, because he's not able to be off oxygen, but there are options that families have exercised. Just tell us what the options are so we can make a fully informed decision. I just did not feel as if we were getting from some of those doctors the information needed to make a fully informed choice. And I'm so grateful that the other doctors were put in our path in time so that we did not pull the plug on this boy. So yeah, there was some tension there in those early
I do
stages.
feel like kind of similar that our doctors did. The majority of them did go with worst case scenario, worst outcome um, situations. And we were told the same thing, that our daughter was probably going to be more than likely 100% total dependent care. And just, they would talk about quality of life and how they didn't feel like um, she would really have a big quality of life just based on her brain injury. Now, we did have a neurologist who talked a lot about brain plasticity and how things can change, but they did tell us that she was more severe HIE, and that her quality of life probably was not going to be well. And so, like I said, we did go with a little bit more of a different route. And I don't feel like we were giving up on Riley. I just feel like we were trying to be as compassionate as possible and really think about what her life was going to look like. And so we did go the more palliative, conservative route. And luckily, we were blessed with a little trooper who decided she was not going anywhere, and really showed us how much potential that she truly had. So we kind of switched gears and then went more towards extensive therapy and things, more around 6 weeks. Whereas I wish sometimes that we had done it a little earlier, because they did give us such worst case scenario situations as far as her prognosis. And I really don't think at that time there was a whole lot of in-depth case studies on HIE, and how widely different outcomes can be, versus like a mild injury could have debilitating results, and a long-term outcome, and then more serious injury could have less detrimental long-term results. I really don't think that I feel like if they had given us a more like wider outlook, like we really don't know. Only time is going to tell what your child's brain injury is going to look like later in life. We might have been a little, that might have changed our perspective as far as care went early in the early days.
Yeah. And I can assume everybody has different experiences and often feel, and sometimes simultaneously feel, like fear and gratitude, frustration and trust. And, it truly, HIE diagnosis, it really truly is a roller coaster of everything and what's coming at you. And you can only do with what you know in those moments, and have trust you're making the best decisions for these little ones. So I guess with that being said, just finding your people. You guys have talked a lot about the supports that you've had along the way. Are there any other people throughout your community that really showed up, or both of you are part of the Hope for HIE community? How has that impacted you? What services and supports have you engaged in that helped you through? And relationships that may have been formed throughout?
So we were blessed to find the Hope for HIE community relatively early on in our NICU stay. And I feel like a lot of the parents in that group were life-changingly supportive to us. It went from feeling like we were the only parents with an HIE baby to seeing this vast community of moms that love really hard. And they always show up every time you ask a question on the page, every time you go on there and you're like, I just don't know what to do. I feel so alone. Like, this is what's going on right now. They always show up, like, every time to tell you, like, I know it's hard, but we're here if you want to talk, if you need to call, if you these are questions that you should be asking your team. When we went through this was our experience. And while a lot of those moms had different experiences throughout their early HIE journey, it was nice to just see a perspective as far as how each kiddo kind of went. So I do remember that being a huge support, especially the new to HIE kind of social media group we were in during the first year. It was so incredibly helpful to have all of that whole community of support and know that there were other moms out here, and if they're making it through their journey, then so can I.
What, Mom?
And then we also so Riley, hold on, Riley.
What, Mom?
Here's my little one.
Hi.
So we also do Special Olympics, which we started when she was a little bit older. And she does cheer and swim. So I do feel like kind of those Special Olympics programs that are more geared towards children with disabilities has been a lifesaver for us also.
That's amazing. And she looks amazing. Hello, Riley.
Say hi.
Yeah,
Hi.
for us, the community, the Hope for HIE, I only discovered about a year or so ago, so about a year and a half after his HIE incident. And I'm so grateful for it. It's just, oh, she's so sweet. Oh my goodness, my heart. I love it. And she's your twin, by the way, Katie. She's totally your twin.
She really
Um,
is.
yes. No, it's been so helpful to just know that we're not alone, because this journey can feel very isolating, and you wonder, you have no idea sometimes about how to navigate X, Y, Z at this age. Has anybody else seen this? I mean, I have not been one who's participated in the group much, but I read a lot of the posts and have used the search button too. And I found a lot of, insight and answers just in terms of what people have already asked and offered and commented and offered advice on. So it's been so helpful. I had no idea. I never even heard of HIE until he had his crisis. So it's just opened up a whole world of just knowing that across borders there are, because of course, like I'm in Canada and I think you guys are in the States, across borders there are people that have walked a very similar route and with very different outcomes. And so it just gives you hope that you don't know where your kiddo's going to land. Only God knows. And at the end of the day, the sky's the proverbial limit, and however far your kiddo gets is as far as they get. But what are the supports that we can put in place? And the group has been very helpful for stuff that I didn't even know existed. I never heard of hyperbaric, for instance, and then I think somebody in the group mentioned that it worked well for their child, and so it's like, oh, okay, like just stuff that you have no idea about, especially as a lay person when it comes to medicine. Um, and then other community, yeah, like I mentioned, our church community has been amazing. The best church community we've ever had. And we've been a member of members of a few churches over the years, but there's something really special about this group of people that we're fortunate to do life with, and our family. And yeah, the local All Abilities Play Group that was founded by a midwife at the clinic that I had used, but I didn't have her as my midwife, whose daughter has cerebral palsy. And so she started an All Abilities Play Group, and we haven't been able to make it out to anything just yet, unfortunately. But just knowing that they're there and he's not too young to come on out, and they do like All Abilities Soccer, for instance, and whatnot. So all these little things, kind of like what Katie was mentioning, where your child can still feel, um, able to fully participate in something comparable to what his siblings are. It's just so heartwarming that we have that support today. I don't think that was in place for parents of HIE kids 30 years ago, right? As an example, it was much harder to find. So yeah, community makes many hands make light work. Community has been incredible. And I cringe to think of life without any supportive community at all in this journey. I'm so grateful that Katie has that now, that I have that. And actually, it's funny, Jason and I have talked about potentially, making a change, in terms of, making some sacrifices as a family to, get to our financial goals sooner and whatnot. And one of those that we had tossed around was, do we move elsewhere? And I was like, absolutely not. We're not leaving these people. So we will find something if we're gonna get to our goals faster. Great, that's good. I'm fully supportive of that. But we're gonna find something around here, because these people are gems, and you don't find community like that easily. So that goes to show you how important this community has become to our family.
And that's just wonderful. And, I think the takeaway is that community may not look the way that you originally thought it might, and it might surprise you in one way or another, for good, bad, or otherwise. But it's just, Shana, you said it, it's just it's meaningful to find those connections wherever you can. So, with that being said, what would you tell yourself, your earlier self, whether you're in the NICU wondering what is this going to look like, that first year when you're sitting at home, what would you have told your earlier self when it comes to relationships and support?
I think I would have told my earlier self to seek more support earlier. I think it would have really changed how my mental health was during, especially that first year of having an HIE baby. But looking back now, I mean, my daughter still has HIE, but in the early days, it felt like our whole entire life was centered around HIE. I thought about it constantly, every day, every hour, constantly researching things about it. And now, while we do still have HIE in our life, it's not all consuming. I mean, I don't think every single day about her having HIE, and kind of am able to distance myself from that a little bit because it's not as all consuming as it was in the beginning. Things have definitely improved a lot in the last 8 years.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I would say, be more ready to accept the help that people were giving you, and let people help. Let people help. We were okay at that. We're not used to being the center of attention. We're not used to, being the ones that needed assistance. We were great at jumping in when others would need help, and how can we help and be boots on the ground. But receiving that help didn't come naturally to us. It took some time. And I think it took some mentions from a few folks encouraging us to accept the help. People want to help. Let them help. So I would encourage, us back then in the PCCU, let people help. Let people lift a load, whatever it is, in whatever way that they can. For some people, it was wanting to send some money to help with, food, Ronald McDonald House fees, even though they're low, but like those things, parking, to others that wanted to send meals or run errands. They'd come and visit us where the children's hostel was, and knowing that it was hard for us to leave with the other kids, they're like, can I run errands for you, Shana? You're still postpartum. Can I grab you Depends or something from Walmart? It's like, yeah, actually, like, oh, amazing. And say, let people help. Be more ready to accept help. Nobody wants to be in that position. But when you are in that position, if people, relationships around you are wanting to come around in a genuine way, trustworthy way, which are key, to help, then let them do them. And I guess also kind of to Katie's point, and don't be afraid to let go of relationships that are disappointing you, at that stage. It doesn't mean necessarily cutting them off or so, but realizing that, folks may show up in different ways than are helpful. And as hurtful as that is, that's okay, that where they are now. And then you go from there. And now I have people asking me for ice cream, little people. I will eat. Thank you so much, though, for having us on. I really appreciate the opportunity to contribute a bit from our experience to this discussion. So thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Katie.
You're welcome. I want to just thank you guys. Having parents provide their perspectives to shed a light on a certain topic, it is so valuable to our community, and just a reminder to everybody in our community that you're not alone in this. There are so many people here waiting to chat with you. We have Hope for HIE has lots of different programs, and just this amazing supportive community of parents that are there for you. So thank you guys for all of your time. And I know you have kids anxiously waiting to move on with your day. So I don't want to take up any more of your time. So thank you and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, you too. Take care.